Some nights felt longer than others, but that was just how the graveyard shift worked. At least, that was what I believed when I started at Granger Plastics. The place had a reputation for high turnover, but I figured it was just the hours. 11 at night to 7 in the morning could wear anyone down. I did not mind the quiet. I liked the rhythm of machines humming in the background, the occasional small talk during breaks, and the dim, flickering lights that somehow made the place feel distant from the real world. Everything seemed routine until one of the newer workers, Eddie, just stopped showing up. No calls, no word. No one seemed surprised. They filled his spot without even blinking, and I did not ask questions. Things started getting strange when Kelsey, a woman who usually kept to herself, approached me during one of our 15-minute breaks. Her face was pale, and her eyes darted around like she was trying to make sure no one else was listening. She asked me if my shifts ever felt longer. Not boring, but longer, like I had been working for a full day, only to glance at the clock and see just a few hours had passed. I laughed it off and told her the night messes with your head, but she grabbed my wrist and said she had wrapped over 10 pallets that night. That was not possible in 3 hours, not even if she had skipped every break. Her hands were trembling. She quit 2 days later. The more I tried to ignore it, the more obvious it became. One night, I loaded the same crate 3 separate times. Convinced I had already finished it, I began to notice the hands on the old punch clock near the break room twitching slightly when no one was near it. Sometimes the clock would display times that made no sense, 13 to 88 or 04 to 61, then snap back to normal before printing out the slip. I told myself it was just a mechanical glitch. After all, the company still used one of those dusty old analog punch systems, the kind with metal arms and a satisfying clunk when you slid your card in. It gave off this grinding sound, like it was swallowing something. One night, I forgot to punch in and had to run back to the clock. The hallway felt longer than usual, the lights dimmer. I blamed it on being tired, but when I reached the time clock, I could swear the numbers were glowing, faint, but pulsing. Against better judgment, I punched in. That was the first time everything changed. I felt a deep drop in my stomach, like I was falling. The air got colder. When I turned around, the hallway behind me was warped. The same structure, but different paint peeling off the walls, buzzing fluorescent lights barely holding on, posters for safety regulations that had not been used in decades. I made it to the factory floor, but the machines looked different. Thicker, older, coated in rust. The workers were moving slowly, repeating the same motion over and over like broken puppets. I tried talking to one of them, but his eyes were blank and he never stopped moving. Even worse, the pieces being produced were not plastic, they were something else. Bone-like, organic, wet. I ran. I sprinted back to the hallway, punched out without thinking, and the world twisted again. Just like that, I was back in the normal factory. Everything clean, lights normal, clock ticking away like nothing had happened. I told myself I imagined it. Maybe I had fallen asleep or had a panic attack. But when I checked my punch card, it said I had worked 16 hours, though only 4 had passed. From that night on, I watched everything more closely. I noticed how every time someone punched in, the clock made a different sound. Sometimes a click, sometimes a squelch, sometimes a low hum. I tried to test it, punched in early, punched out late. Each time the world changed slightly. One night, all the windows had bars. Another night, no one spoke at all, not even during breaks. Once I saw another version of myself working at a machine. Same clothes, same tired look. But when he turned to face me, he grinned wide and unnatural. The factory was shifting, and the clock was the door. I stopped sleeping properly. I became obsessed. I drew maps of the factory from each version I saw. I wrote down the names of workers who vanished, tracking when and where they last punched in. The list kept growing. When I realized what the clock was doing, feeding off our time, dragging pieces of us into other realities, I decided to end it. I waited until the shift was almost over, grabbed a crowbar, and approached the clock. It looked different that night, older, as if it had aged 100 years in a day. The gears were exposed. It creaked with every second. I lifted the crowbar But before I struck, I caught my reflection in the glass face of the clock. It stared back at me, but it was not me. Its eyes were darker, its smile just a little too wide. My arm froze. The clock let out a groan like something deep inside was waking up. I smashed it anyway. Sparks flew, the lights exploded, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in the same hallway, but it was different. The logo on the wall had changed. The walls were made of something like concrete, but softer, and when I looked down the hall, the factory had changed again. Same shape, different version. The machines were quiet this time, but I could hear something breathing. I ran to the time clock. It was back. Perfect condition, like nothing had happened. I punched in, desperate to go back, but the world twisted, and now the machines were moving on their own. No workers, just me. I punched out. Another shift. This time, the walls dripped. I screamed. I smashed the clock again, and again. But each time I wake up in a new version, the factory never stops changing. Some versions are almost normal. Others are nightmares. I am trapped. Somewhere between dimensions, endlessly moving through realities, designed to feed the thing inside the clock. If you find an old factory with an analog time clock that clicks louder than it should run, do not clock in. Do not go near it. Leave and never come back. Because once it knows your name, once it has even a second of your time, it will never let you go. I am still here, still shifting, still trying to find the version of the factory where I can finally escape. But I do not think that version exists anymore. I used to think the graveyard shift was the easiest job in the world. No bosses breathing down your neck, no ringing phones, no co-workers gossiping in the break room, just silence, cold air, and the soft hum of machines. When I got hired at the old steel parts factory on the edge of town, I felt lucky. The pay was good, and the place had been running for decades. People said it used to be part of a government contract, something to do with military parts back in the day. But that was all history now. I was told my only job was to monitor the lines, log any malfunctions, and stay out of the restricted sections. Easy money. Or so I thought. The first few nights went smooth. The place was huge, dimly lit, with long, flickering fluorescent lights overhead, and the machines groaned with every cycle like they were tired of working. There were 5 main assembly lines. Lines 1 through 4 handled regular parts like gears and metal panels. Line 5 was always powered down. That is what the manual said. It had not been active for years. I passed it every night while doing rounds. The conveyor belt was long and dusty. The robotic arms were rusted and stiff. It looked like a dead part of the factory. But on my 4th night, something strange happened. I was filling out a maintenance log when I heard a soft mechanical whirring behind me. I turned around and saw the belt on line 5 moving. Slow, like a crawl. No lights were on, and no power had been restored. I checked the control panel. Dead. Still, the belt moved for about 10 seconds, then stopped. I told myself it was leftover tension in the motor or a glitch. Factories are old. Machines act weird sometimes. By the end of the week, line 5 was moving more often. It would hum softly for a few seconds, and then stop. Sometimes it moved backward. Once I saw a small metallic piece slowly slide across the belt like invisible fingers were pushing it. I started logging it, but every time I submitted the report, the supervisor would just shrug and say that line 5 had not been used in years. Nothing to worry about. I could not shake the feeling that something was off. One night, curiosity got the best of me. I stayed close to line 5, pretending to check nearby systems, and just watched. Around 3 a.m., the air shifted. It got colder, heavier. The machines on the other lines slowed a bit, and that old belt on line 5 came to life. No warning, no sound. It just started moving, slow and steady, and then the arms moved. Not all at once, one by one. Each robotic arm twitched, then turned, like waking up from a long sleep. I watched as the arms picked up parts from bins that were supposed to be empty. Small joints, rods, synthetic muscle-like wires. They moved with precision, assembling something, but there was no blueprint, no digital guide. I stepped closer and saw what looked like a rib cage being constructed from a mix of steel and some kind of synthetic flesh. The smell hit me, rotten and chemical, like something half dead preserved in fluid. My stomach turned. I backed away. I was not supposed to see this. The next day, I asked one of the older workers about line 5. He looked at me for a long moment, then said nothing and walked away. That night, I brought a flashlight and decided to follow the line all the way to the end. It took me through a narrow hallway that curved into a section I had never seen before. No lights, dust thick in the air. The belt continued moving, like it knew I was following. I passed old crates with faded warning labels, military logos scratched out, broken glass panels, and lockers with strange symbols. Then I reached the end of the line. Rows of bodies, not human, not fully machine, hybrid things lying motionless on metal slabs, each one half covered in metal plating and half exposed with what looked like real human skin stretched over steel bones. Some had eyes, some did not. Some had mouths half-formed, stitched shut or wide open in a silent scream. Their chests rose and fell slightly like shallow breaths. I felt the bile rise in my throat. One of them twitched. A metal finger jerked. Another flexed its jaw. I should have run, but I was frozen. Then one of them opened its eyes. Bright blue, too human, too aware. It looked right at me. I stepped back. Its arm reached out. The fingers were a mix of bone and wire. It whispered something I could not understand, like static and crying at the same time. I ran through the hallway, past the silent machines, back to the security office, and locked the door. I tried to call someone, anyone, but the line was dead. The cameras were static. I waited until the sun came up and walked straight out of that factory. I never went back. They fired me for abandonment, but I did not care. I could not care. I kept what I saw to myself for years, until I saw a news article 2 months ago. A fire broke out at the old factory. Police found bodies. Not human, not robots, something else. The article was pulled an hour after it was posted. Now, I cannot sleep without seeing those eyes. I know they are not gone. I know those machines were not building parts. They were building replacements for us. And whatever project they were made for might be waking up again. So if you ever work the graveyard shift, stay away from the lines that are supposed to be off, because sometimes the factory does not forget what it was built to do. Some jobs stay with you forever, not because of the money or the people, but because something about them leaves a mark that never really fades. For me, it was the graveyard shift at the old Norville paper mill, a decaying beast of rusted metal and rotting wood tucked deep in the valley outside town. When I first got hired as the night janitor, I figured it would be easy money. Clean the floors, take out the trash, keep to myself. The only catch was that I had to stay clear of the 3rd floor. It was sealed off due to safety concerns. They said the floorboards were unstable, the supports weak, and nobody had gone up there in years. At first, I did not care. I had no reason to climb stairs into darkness when my job was on the first 2 levels. But then I started hearing things. It began as soft thuds, like something heavy being dropped above me. I tried to brush it off. Rats, maybe. Or pipes settling. That old building groaned constantly anyway, like it hated still being alive. But the sounds got worse. Footsteps, slow and dragging, crossing from one side of the floor to the other, always between 2 and 3 in the morning, like clockwork. One night I stood frozen by the stairwell, listening to the sound of chains scraping across the wooden floor above. I stared up at the rusted chain that had been bolted to the ceiling near the stairs. It had not moved. The air was cold, too cold for a summer night, and I could hear my own breath like I had stepped inside a freezer. I never saw anyone. I never heard voices, but the footsteps always came, and the dragging always followed. I asked one of the old maintenance guys during a rare daytime visit if he knew anything about the 3rd floor. He gave me a strange look and told me not to go digging where I should not. When I pushed, he muttered something about an accident years ago, said it was in the logs, but those were locked in the basement office. I waited, until the end of my shift one night and went looking. It took an hour to find the right cabinet and another 10 minutes to force it open. Inside were dusty logbooks, most of them dull entries about machine checks and chemical levels. But then I found it. A report dated April 1994. The name written in shaky pen was Leonard Briggs. It said he had been working late and never clocked out. The next morning, his harness was found hanging from the ceiling beam on the 3rd floor, but the body was never recovered. No signs of struggle, no blood, just an empty harness swaying in the air. The next page was a note from the plant supervisor requesting the 3rd floor be sealed. The chain was bolted down. Access was revoked. End of story. I tried to quit after that, told myself it was not worth it, but something kept pulling me back. Bills piled up. I told myself I was imagining things. I avoided the stairwell. I wore headphones. But the footsteps came anyway, and the dragging, and then the elevator started acting up. The old thing barely worked, and it was only used to haul supplies. But one night, just after 2:30, I heard the bell ring. The doors creaked open, and I watched as it rose slowly past my floor. Nobody had called it. The buttons had not been touched. I stood there, staring, heart pounding in my ears. Then it stopped on the 3rd floor. The light above the door flickered once, then went dark. That was the night everything changed. I could not ignore it anymore. I had to see it for myself. I waited until 3, then stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 3rd floor. Nothing happened. I pressed again. The light stayed off. I turned to leave, and that was when the elevator shuddered. Slowly, groaning, it began to rise. I never touched the panel. My stomach twisted as I felt the machine carry me upward. The moment it stopped, the doors opened, and I stepped into a hallway that smelled like mildew and dust and something sour, like old blood. The lights flickered dimly overhead. The air was heavy and still. And then I saw him. He stood at the end of the hallway, facing away from me. A man in an old, stained jumpsuit. His head bent low, his arms limp at his sides. Chains hung from his wrists, clinking softly with every small movement. I could not speak. My throat was dry, and my legs felt like stone. He turned slowly, and his eyes met mine. They were black. Not dark, not shadowed, just black, like something had hollowed him out completely. He raised one arm and pointed toward me. Then he spoke in a voice that was not a voice at all. It was a sound that crawled through my skull and settled in my spine. Replace me or join me. I do not know how long I stood there. Time felt broken. I wanted to run, but my feet would not move. I thought of my family, my life, the long nights I had wasted inside this place. And I knew what he meant. He had never left. His soul, or whatever was left of it, was trapped, bound to the floor he had died on. And the only way out was if someone else took his place willingly. The offer was clear. Walk back to the elevator, pretend none of this happened, and wait until it came again. Or take the chains, take the burden, let him rest. I chose neither. I turned and ran. Down the hall, down the stairs, out the door, into the night. I never went back. The mill shut down for good a few months later. But sometimes I wake in the dead of night to the sound of chains dragging across the floor above my apartment. I live on the 2nd floor. There is no 3rd floor here, and yet the sound comes anyway. The footsteps, the dragging, the cold that fills the air. I know he is still waiting, still searching. The choice still lingers in the silence. One day, someone will say yes, and on that day, he will finally rest. But until then, the elevator rises on its own, and the chains keep dragging. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear the hiss of the steel melting and the deep, pulsing heartbeat of the furnace echoing through the tunnels. Working the graveyard shift at Ironvale Steel Plant was never easy. It paid well, sure, but something about those late hours made everyone act different. Most guys stayed quiet, kept to themselves, always glancing at the old wall clock like they were counting down the seconds to sunrise. I was new then, trying to prove myself, so I did not pay much attention to their weird little habits. But I did notice something strange every night. Around 3:30, the plant would get unnaturally quiet, like the machines themselves were holding their breath. That silence pressed in, heavy like the heat from the furnace, and every single time, I caught older workers exchanging looks like they knew something I did not. One night, during my 3rd week, I was eating a sandwich in the break room when one of the older guys, Carlos, muttered something that stuck with me. He said, "The man walks near the fire when the clock hits 3:33. I thought he was messing with me, just another prank to scare the newbie. But he looked dead serious, eyes sunken and voice barely above a whisper. I laughed it off at the time, but I started noticing more signs. Workers refused to take the furnace patrol during that time. One guy traded shifts so often that I ended up stuck with the 3 a.m. rounds more than once. I never saw anything, just the same endless tunnels, the glow of heat in the distance, and the metallic taste of sweat in the air. But that feeling of being watched, that got stronger every night. The plant had cameras everywhere, but they did not help. I once asked the security guy, Bobby, if he ever caught anything weird on the night footage. He looked uncomfortable and said the tapes glitched every single night at 3:33. The audio would cut out. The picture would freeze for a second. And once, the heat sensors caught something standing near the furnace, something shaped like a man, but glowing hotter than anything a human could survive. I thought maybe it was a machine malfunction, some glitch caused by the heat, but Bobby swore he had checked everything. No one was there, nothing was scheduled, and still, every night, the shape returned. Curiosity got the better of me. I started watching the tapes myself. Bobby let me sit in the security booth a few nights after my shift, and together we waited for the clock to hit 3:33. The first time I saw it, I felt cold all over. The regular video showed an empty corridor, just like always. But the thermal cam, a figure stood near the furnace door, arms hanging low, body trembling, with heat waves rising from its skin, like it was on fire. It never moved. It just stood there, facing the camera, like it knew we were watching. Bobby paused the tape, his hand shaking, and told me to leave it alone. He said one of the workers, years ago, fell into the furnace during maintenance. They never found the body. Management called it an accident and moved on, but the old crew never forgot. Carlos later told me the man had been locked in by mistake. No one noticed until it was too late. The furnace had melted him down, flesh and bone and soul. The next few nights, I felt different walking those halls. The furnace room felt tighter, hotter, like the heat had claws and it wanted to dig into my skin. The shadows looked longer. I started hearing soft footsteps behind me even when I was alone. Whispers, like someone breathing heavily just over my shoulder. I stopped eating during breaks. I stopped talking. I just worked and left, counting every second until the shift ended. Then came the night. Everything changed. It was a routine patrol. The red lights above the furnace were blinking, and the air was thick enough to choke on. I checked the gauges, logged the pressure, and turned to leave when I heard the heavy metal door behind me creak open. No one was scheduled to enter the furnace room. I knew that. I turned around slowly, and in the doorway stood a figure. Not fully solid, not smoke either. Just a blur of heat in the shape of a man, trembling, glowing, pulsing like a dying star. My skin started to burn. I mean, actually burn, like I was standing inside the furnace itself. The room spun. I tried to run, but the figure reached out. Its hand was half melted, skin dripping like wax, eyes hollow, and blackened like burned coal. It did not speak, but I felt its voice inside my skull. Share the heat. That is all it said. Share the heat. I screamed, I think. I do not remember much after that. When I woke up, I was in the locker room. Carlos and Bobby were standing over me, faces pale. They said the cameras showed me walking into the furnace room, and then just vanishing for exactly 3 minutes. When I reappeared, I was on the floor, clothes scorched and skin red, like I had been sunburned from the inside out. I quit that night, never went back, never even picked up my last paycheck. The doctors said I had suffered some kind of thermal exposure, but there were no burns, no external damage. just nerve pain and a deep chill in my bones that has never gone away. Every now and then, I wake up in the middle of the night, skin burning and lungs gasping like I am still there. I check the time. It is always 3:33. I do not talk about it anymore. No one believes me anyway. But if you ever find yourself working a graveyard shift in a place where the heat never dies, where the silence grows loud near dawn, listen closely. If you hear footsteps behind you, if the furnace starts to hum louder than usual, do not turn around. Do not look. Just keep walking. Because the man is still there, waiting, and he is always looking for someone new to share the heat. They say the worst kind of fear is the one that creeps in slowly, the one that builds when everything around you seems almost normal, but just slightly wrong. I took the graveyard shift at the Holston meat processing plant because I needed the money, plain and simple. My wife was pregnant, bills were stacking up, and the night shift paid more. I did not ask questions. I showed up on time, wore my gloves, kept my head down, and did my job. The place was cold and smelled like blood and bleach, but the people were friendly enough. At least the ones who stuck around. Most new hires quit within the first week. Some claimed they saw things. Others just stopped showing up altogether. I figured they could not handle the late hours or the smell, until I started noticing it too. It started small. Every night when the shift began, we would hear the intercom crackle to life with sharp commands. All of us had to wear earpieces, and the voice that came through was deep and clipped, giving orders like move faster or tighten inspection or double-check the bones. No one ever questioned it. We were told it was the night shift supervisor, Mr. Rayburn, but no one ever saw him. Not once. His office was upstairs in the old admin building, supposedly sealed off after a fire years ago. Yet we all acted like it was normal. Every time he spoke, people moved, like their lives depended on it. One night, I made a joke about the voice sounding like it came from a war movie, and the guy next to me went pale. He whispered that jokes like that get noticed. I laughed it off. That same guy did not show up the next night. They said he quit. I asked around, but no one had seen him leave. One night, I was walking past the security office when I noticed something strange. The monitors flickered whenever someone passed by the upper hallway, especially near the old admin wing. I asked the guard about it, and he shrugged, said the cameras were old, probably glitching from bad wiring. But I started watching more closely, and the pattern was clear. Every time the camera near the admin hallway glitched, someone on the floor would suddenly straighten up, like they felt watched. The voice would follow moments later, barking a correction or warning. I started feeling like we were not just being supervised. We were being watched, constantly, not by cameras, but by something else. Then came the meat crates. Each night, a forklift would bring sealed crates to the packing section. The labels were blank. No markings, no barcodes, just heavy boxes that smelled stronger than usual. I was told not to open them, but curiosity got the better of me. Late one night, when the others were on break, I pried one open. Inside was a mass of bones, human bones, skulls, ribs, femurs, cleaned and packed like product. I staggered back, nearly vomiting. Before I could run, the intercom blared into my ear. "Return to your station." I froze. My hands trembled. The voice repeated, slower this time. "Return. Now." I ran to the manager's office, only to find it empty. Lights off, desk clean. I looked through the drawers for any emergency contacts. Instead, I found a newspaper clipping dated 5 years ago. It detailed a freak accident at the plant. A supervisor named Richard Rayburn had fallen into the bone grinder during a maintenance check. His body was never fully recovered. I felt sick. The voice that had been commanding us every night belonged to a man who had died gruesomely in this very building. I stumbled out, heart pounding, only to see a shadow moving in the hallway, not walking, gliding, like smoke in the shape of a man. It turned the corner and vanished. The next shift, no one mentioned anything. I tried to ask the others about Rayburn, but they pretended not to hear. Eyes down, faces pale. I realized they all knew. They had been following the commands of a dead man, and so had I. That night, the voice grew harsher. It yelled more. Punishments were threatened. One worker was dragged away by the forklift after being accused of slacking. The others watched without a word, like it was normal. I knew I had to get out. I could not stay another night. But when I tried to leave early, the intercom roared with static. My earpiece nearly exploded with the sound of screeching metal and a voice growling, "Obedience is survival." I was cornered in the storage area. The doors slammed shut. Cold air filled the space. Then I saw him. A tall, smoky figure with hollow eyes and a face half gone. Flesh peeled away like wet paper. He pointed at me. "You defied orders." I tried to run but slipped on the wet floor. My hands landed on another open crate. More bones. A skull grinned up at me, teeth cracked. I recognized a tattoo on one of the ribs. It belonged to the guy who disappeared 2 weeks ago. He had shown me pictures of his daughter during our lunch break. The ghost moved closer, whispering words I could not understand. My limbs locked up. I felt like my mind was being pulled apart. I do not remember how I escaped. I woke up hours later in my car outside the plant. My clothes were soaked in blood. I quit the next day, never looked back. But sometimes I still hear the voice, in my dreams, on static radios, in the hum of my refrigerator late at night, telling me to obey, warning me to never speak, because the graveyard shift at Holston Meat Processing was never about meat. It was about control, about blind obedience, about how fear keeps people in line, and how a dead man can still run a factory if everyone is too afraid to question him. If these stories gave you chills, there's more waiting in the shadows. Subscribe to Horror Spectrum and never feel alone again.